Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to this week's edition of Music Policy Forum Live, our weekly conversation program, where we talk with a whole bunch of different music stakeholders about how we can collectively build stronger, more resilient, and more equitable music scenes, and how do we navigate the complexities of the last couple of years that we all have been sort of going through in real time. Again, this is Michael Bracey with the Music Policy Forum, joining you from outside of Washington, D.C. Thanks as always to all of you who are taking time out of your incredibly busy lives to be with us, to watch the program live. And thanks to those of you who are watching on our program archive. Some ground rules for those who are new to the program. Again, we will be taking questions via the Q&A window. If you have questions throughout our conversation, please feel free to pop them in. And if you're so inclined, don't feel obligated, but if you're so inclined, let us know who's on the show. Say hi in the chat window, just who you are, where you're coming from. It's always great to see where people are joining from all over the world. I'll introduce my co-host, Moose. Do you all hear Moose? Is he still yipping downstairs? Oh, he was quiet. There he goes. There he goes. We put Moose in his chill out tent. Moose does not want to be in his chill out tent right now, so he's going to be my co-host until he successfully chills. In the meantime, before we get to our guests, we're going to, as we do every week, just talk a little bit about some news updates and some happenings. Because my goodness, as you all know, everything is happening really, really quickly, and it's a lot going on. Early indications, as reported in a couple of news outlets from the Small Business Administration's effort to process the shuttered venue operator grants. Early indications are there are about 10,000 completed applications, another 12,000 that were begun or for a variety of reasons were not completed. And of course, we're unclear what that means, and we're unclear how far 10,000 completed applications, how far that's going to go. But there have been some estimates that there's going to be a little bit of money left after that first wave, but the money is going to be going out the door. For those of you, again, who've watched this program, have heard me say this before, this stuff is frustrating. The federal government is frustrating. I've been very fortunate to work at the intersection of the federal government and cultural policy for 20 some odd years. And, I just advise everybody to just continue. I think the feelings of anger and frustration and concern and worry are hard earned, and they're legitimate. And I would never tell anybody not to feel what they feel. I also hope that we approach the people at the SBA in good faith, that they're doing the best they can do in really difficult circumstances. Again, they were not really set up to administer a program of this scale. It's not something they asked for. They were given it by Congress. There sort of is a choice that you make in federal programs. At least it's not completely binary, but it kind of is binary. You can be a fast spending program and get money on the street really, really quickly, or you can be a program that really spends a lot of time and detail to make sure that only qualified applicants are the ones who get resources. And given the experience with CARES Act and some of the other programs last year where we saw an effort to push money out really, really quickly across the board, and we saw a lot of fraud and abuse, there really is an effort here to thread the needle and get the money out as quickly as possible, but also make sure the money goes only to those who it's intended to go towards. And it's hard to do both. So again, that's not meant in any way to diminish the incredibly challenging experience and how hard and frustrating this is for venue owners and others who've been working this process. But I hope that we are finally getting over the hump and the money is going to be landing in the next couple of weeks, and we'll see what the trajectory of the program is beyond that. Other pieces of just sort of updates and news, and Alex, our awesome producer, is going to put some links in the chat throughout the program. Certainly encourage you to go back if you have some time this weekend and check out a couple of our previous programs. Last week's program celebrating International Jazz Day was something that we're really, really proud of. A fantastic conversation honing in on how HBCUs are approaching jazz education, and some updates from our friend Sarah Donnelly and the Jazz Road Residency Program. For those of you who are interested in jazz or working in jazz and are not tied into those resources, definitely worth checking that out. And also, again, I'd really recommend a program from a couple weeks ago featuring Rachel Moore from the Music Center in Los Angeles, talking about the evolving roles of performing arts centers as we think about the future of music and the future of culture. And also a really frank and honest conversation with Damon Krakowski, who is a longtime musician and advocate, and our friend Rebecca Gates, again, musician, advocate, really talking about some of the structural challenges with this streaming marketplace and things we're going to take seriously. Now, the Times today has a really well-reported and really thoughtful kind of overview of the streaming music. It's not really even a debate, but the dynamics behind streaming music payouts and some different perspectives. I really recommend that. Recommend that article if you're interested in just sort of a lay of the land in terms of what the basic conversations are. And that's a good way to remind everybody that this is Bandcamp Friday, and this is, my understanding, is the final Bandcamp Friday. Bandcamp for the last year has been waiving their share of revenues for downloads on Fridays. All the proceeds go to musicians and participants in the Bandcamp platform. So go buy some music, go buy it on Bandcamp. And it's also a good reminder, if you think about the sort of ethos behind companies like Bandcamp and others that are really trying to be building our music community, there's some problematic things happening with other companies in the space. And, a great example of that is Joe Rogan with his $100 million contract from Spotify out there telling people don't get vaccinated if you're young and healthy. So lots of interesting dynamics, support the businesses that need our support, always just try to be thinking about that. And we're going to get through this together somehow. And with that, Dani Grant, thank you for joining us. Today's conversation is the first one we're having this month, the month of May. We're going to be going on dives on different cities and regions, and how they're sort of managing reopening, what's happening on the ground, what the next couple of years look like on a pragmatic and practical level. And Dani, as most of you know, is a board member here at Music Policy Forum. She's the operator and owner of the Mishawaka Amphitheatre outside of beautiful Fort Collins, Colorado, and involved in 15,000 other things as a activist and advocate and entrepreneur and mom and sister and everything else Dani does. But thanks for joining us today, Dani.
Thanks. Yeah. There's lots to talk about in Colorado for sure right now.
Yeah. So what's the big headline? What do we need to know? What's the big takeaway right now?
Well, I've been, working with my staff and talking with, agents and customers and everything. And it's really kind of coming down to the next couple of weeks where Colorado is going to lift virtually all their rules and regulations around the COVID stuff. And I think it's all vaccine, related. It's all about the ratios of people and getting to that comfortable space of being at 65, 75% vaccinated, which, I'm in agreement that that's a really good place to be. And I'm excited and I'm ready for relief in terms of extra work we're doing and, having to have hostesses spend 2 extra hours, on sanitation processes and, putting up stanchions that takes an hour before every show to, create the party pens for all the people. There's a lot of benefit to kind of reducing all of the efforts around COVID, but there's this real emotional and, practical concern about the change. And everybody is coming in with different levels of comfort. Everyone's coming in with different understandings of what the rules are in the state and the counties. So it's really kind of become, for the Mishawaka, an opportunity to have an outward facing message and really try and speak to our customers, our staff, and everyone about here's what's happening, here's where we stand, and here's what we're going to do. And that's just a different mentality. Instead of using mandates to help police all the people that come into the building, we're now kind of just saying, well, here's what we believe in. Mishawaka is going to continue wearing masks until all of our staff feel comfortable enough to remove them, even if we're not required to by law. We're going to continue to recommend that customers wear their masks when they walk about the venue and in the building. We're also going to maintain social distancing in any show that we've pre-sold with that notion, right? So if we've sold a low capacity show that's seated 200 people, we are, even with pressures from agents or artists who obviously want to help, increase the revenue that they can receive from a show like that, we're going to hold the line and say, hey, we're going to play this show off as we sold it out of respect for the people who bought in and not knowing whether or not they would be comfortable with making a change without their knowledge, So barring taking a show and refunding everybody's money and letting them start over and buy into a different concept. We're going to hold on to what we committed to, and we're going to play off shows the way we booked them and the way we presented them to the public. That being said, that provides much complication for my staff, because through the month of May and June, we'll have one night a show of 200 people with tables, and the next night we'll have a show for 500 people, and the next night we'll have a show for 1,000 people, and then we'll go back to seated. And so it's going to be 2 months of a lot of chaos operationally, and for the shows that we do 1,000 capacity or larger capacity, we're working towards creating some safe refuges in the venue. We anticipate that there might be some people who buy a ticket to a show for 1,000 people and are all gung-ho when they're in their living room, and then they get there and there's anxiety and unexpected discomfort. So we're going to try and create some spaces where people can seek refuge in the show. So obviously from just listening to me talk about this, you can understand how the staff is like, trying to accommodate all these things, and to, say to your patrons, hey, talk to us, let us know how you feel. Instead of trying to police the whole crowd, maybe I can just put some stanchions around your two-top and keep people from getting in your space. So it's a complete shift in how we're operating. And we did put this out to the public, which was pretty nerve-wracking. We didn't know what the response would be from our patrons and the people who love the mission. So good news, we got a lot of wonderful, support for making the change, and it felt really good. The negative was we had a lot of trolly people saying, hey, if you're not comfortable, stay home, or go get vaccinated. And there was a lot of like snipey stuff like that. And so we were kind of like, it's like tipping over to another level of, intolerance for people who aren't, bouncing back quite quick enough. So we're going to try really hard to protect customers from that kind of pressure, and as much as we can, but it's complicated.
Yeah. And, kind of zooming out of the, kind of the national level, of course, you and I, have the enormous honor of being part of the National Revs Initiative with our 18 pilot cities. And so we spent a lot of our time bouncing in between, cohort meetings all over the country. And, clearly one of the, sort of exhausting elements of where we are like today is just the unbelievable diversity of how people are. Just the rules are different everywhere, and the process is different everywhere. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of clarity in terms of, what's going to be down the road in 2 weeks and a month and timelines. And so you've got the competing pressure of not really understanding where we're going in terms of, the public health protocols and what the government's going to allow us to do or not do, with what feels like just an overwhelming rush of shows getting booked and people trying to make plans to sort of map out the year. Could you speak a little bit to just sort of the dynamics you're picking up nationally and how that also fits into the Colorado context?
Yeah, it's a new situation for us, right? We've had these like etiquette and protocols with booking and planning, where a band comes in, they put a hold on a date. We may have a few holds. They say, okay, we want to confirm. We clear the date. They book their date, they confirm, and then that's it, right? That it's set. Right now, there's a lot of moving around and kind of canceling of shows that have been confirmed, and, pressure to go play. There's festivals popping up. Well, I didn't know this was happening. And so there's like all this massive chaos within our booking organization. And I think different states are creating more opportunities for the touring. So it's like, it's chaos. It's a chaotic touring schedule right now. I am hopeful by September that things have calmed down and that things are kind of set up. But as things begin to pop back up, all of a sudden now there's a festival for 5,000 people, and we're booking in stages, and so people are trying to scramble. And I think we see when we talk to people, out in California and in Seattle about what's happening in their booking world. The agents are coming in, after having just booked a bunch of stuff in Texas, and they don't understand, like, why can't we do this? Why are we lower capacities? There's a lot of confusion. And I wish there was like a big map that had, every state and the actual current situation and where things are. And we could like update it, as things were changing. It's that dynamic right now. In 2 weeks, Colorado's done with indoor social distancing. In 30 days, Colorado is done with indoor masks, which is quite different from what our friend Kate is dealing with in Seattle and King County, and the issues that Portland is having. And so nothing is going to fix all of this but time and patience. And I think if we can all try and keep our heads on and, and be flexible, I think if we can't maintain flexibility and, a sense of calmness about this, I'm trying hard not to get upset when, a headlining band pulls the plug on a show after I just cleared the date, because I get it, like everyone's trying to fill the coffer again. Everyone's trying to, make a living. And so balancing with some patience and flexibility is going to be the key to my sanity. And I think the open communication that we have between the Rev cities is extremely helpful, because it gives me a sense of perspective when I'm talking to a touring, agent who's, trying to get across the country and dealing with all the different things. So it's important, I think, to be aware of the differences that are out there. And it's dramatic.
Yep. And Dani, let me ask you let's bring Miguel into the conversation, and I'm going to let you introduce Miguel to our group here, because I know you're really excited he was able to join us today.
Yeah. So Miguel and I go way back. iZCALLi was a band that I had the pleasure of working with in the Spokesbuzz incubator. And I have always had an admiration for Miguel, as he spends as much time on his art and craft as he does on supporting his community. And when I saw he was playing Levitt this month, and I knew that he would have a lot of important things to share with us about how that show is going, how booking is going, and all that. So Miguel, thanks for joining us today. It's so good to see you. I miss you.
So good to see you, Dani. Thank you so much for inviting me to this. Well, it's been awesome to get things rolling again for the band. During the pandemic, definitely put like a halt to all of our plans that we were doing at the time. But it also was a refreshment for us in some ways. We had some family stuff happening. Brenda, our bass player, was just getting ready to have her 2 little baby twins at the time. So it was a welcomed, I guess, for us. It kind of worked out. We were not looking to have any downtime, but made our plans easier just as far as that went, because it gave Brenda an opportunity to be with her babies. That's like a super important time in their life, of course. So she was able to focus 100% on that. But as far as like the band goes, like it gave Luigi and I time also to reflect on all the work that we've done, over the years. Sometimes you're just like hungry looking for the next thing, and you don't stop to think and be grateful for the things that you have accomplished. And for us in Colorado, we've been thankful for everything that it's given us. Northern Colorado, especially as well, our involvement with Spokesbuzz and all the entities up there that have supported us. So we're happy to get back on into everything that we're in right now. I was sharing with somebody yesterday, like our last show, our show that was supposed to happen prior to the pandemic was going to be Rock de Mayo at Levitt, and it had been postponed to September and then got moved again to this May. So we're excited about being able to follow through with it, because it just really, we're just picking up right where we left off. So that's not something that a lot of bands can say at the moment. It was a struggle for a lot of them, even to stay together financially, or even like the dynamics of the band during the pandemic changed. So we're super thankful and grateful that we can stay together and just continue where we left off.
That's awesome. And I love to see the love for your band in the chat right there from Julie Suter. And And we're going to bring Chris Acker in a few minutes to talk more specifically about Rock de Mayo. But I want to ask you, Miguel, this is a kind of a hard question. So, do with it whatever feels right to you. But as we've, in this program over the past year, we've talked to a lot of musicians about the sort of, emotional aspect of getting back to performing, which is really going to be complicated because, on the one hand, for many people, I mean, it's what they love to do, right? I mean, a lot of people, this is their passion, it's their livelihood. But then it's also complicated because you're taking risks in some way. You're putting yourself at risk, you're putting your crew at risk, you're potentially putting your audience at risk. And how have you yourself as a, sort of as an artist and a human being and the band, like, what is your feeling now about the balance of when is it time to get back to work, and what kind of scenarios are you excited to get into? And are there things that you're like, I'm not like, we're ready to do this, like we're ready to do Levitt, we're ready to do the Mish, but are there other things you're like, I'm not sure I want to do this other stuff?
Okay. No, that's a great question. Well, for me, I guess I have a pretty biased point of view in terms of my exposure during the pandemic and even after the pandemic. I work in the substance abuse and domestic violence field, and we've had just so much work. Everything blew up during the pandemic. So we did have to adjust. A lot of our services turned into virtual, but a lot of it was still on site. I mean, it's a kind of business where you do have to deal with a person face to face, at least for the admission part of it. So as far as that goes, my life didn't really change. I was coming into the office. We were considered by the state as essential employees. So our services continued pretty much regular. So I never really, I respect everybody's opinion in terms of how they wanted to deal with the pandemic. And I think that was important for me to understand as a professional, but also as a musician, that people were going to have all kinds of opinions and all of them valid. The fear that some people had, the reservation that people had, and some people, the anger, that's understandable. So when I translated that into our music career, we just decided that we weren't going to push anything that wasn't going to serve the overall purpose of the band, serve the overall purpose of the community, and the safety of others, right? Just because I'm hungry to go out and play doesn't mean that I'm going to risk myself or risk others to do so. But at the same time, we were weighing the options. Like the shows we were being offered was like, hey, come and set up in my patio. I don't have a PA. There's no sound. There's no stage. There's going to be maybe 25 people. But, then you think about it, you're like, I was doing that 15 years ago. Like career-wise, is it even a smart choice to do that? So we didn't take many of those options. We were fortunate enough to say no and still, be comfortable with that. But a lot of that played into, it was a lot of factors into it. It wasn't just necessarily the COVID thing. At one point in December, we were going to plan a big show at the end of the year. We were going to do it kind of like a private show with social distancing. We had partnered with some people to put that together in like a warehouse. It was going to be kind of more like a speakeasy kind of situation. But then the mandates really came hard down. Like literally the week we were like going to make the decision if the show was still going to happen or not. But we had already made a plan in terms of like what that was going to look like for us. We were going to respect people's distance in terms of how they wanted to be at the show, but also understanding that we were going to have to explain to people like what they were getting into. They were going to go and show up to the show, and it was going to be like, it was going to be a party basically. And we knew that. We were like, we're comfortable with that. These are our family, this is that. But then things got shut down and we're like, okay, best not to push it. We could have pushed it, and best not to push it, because you also don't want that like negative energy around it. You don't want that pushback or that negative press, if something were to happen at the show. So collectively, we decided like, hey, you know what? This is a sign. It's not the time to do this. So we paused that process. But yeah, overall, it's just been kind of an internal thing that we've looked at as far as the family, like making sure that we're staying safe. Like I know Brenda had COVID at some point. Luigi got COVID at some point. I've been tested many times and came back negative for COVID, but I felt like I had it early on. I don't know. I haven't even done an antibody test, but right now we've got vaccinated. I get my second vaccine tomorrow, so we'll see how I hold up for the festival. But Yeah, that's in a roundabout way my answer.
That's awesome. And Miguel, we'll come back to you after we bring Chris in to talk specifically about Rock de Mayo and some other stuff. And thanks again for joining. We're so happy to have you. And I want to bring in Michael Seaman. Michael is a professor at Colorado State University and a researcher and writer and thinker on all these things. And I wanted to, Michael, I wanted you to weigh in on, what is, again, for this audience today is something, I think we understand pretty well, but people who really don't think a lot about music or don't really understand the music community, don't really think about, but just like the diversity of individuals who are touched by music reopening, and the wide range of people who either have a professional interest or a related professional interest. Could you talk a little bit, like in your research and sort of your writing around music scenes and music communities, how you think about and what you're looking forward to as music starts to reopen, what that kind of domino effect is going to be outside of just venues and musicians themselves?
Yeah, sure. And it's great to be here. Yeah, the thing with music scenes is they're really multi-dynamic. You're definitely, it's an industry without a doubt, and that alone, generates in Colorado we're looking at over $1 billion. But it's more than that. It's also social networks, business networks. It fosters entrepreneurship. And with that being taken away all of a sudden, that was a huge hole to be filled. And simple things like tourism or spending. Like if you look at, I'm working now on a project where I'm looking at a way to be able to estimate how much economic impact venues have all over the country. And thankfully, it's being funded by the Bohemian Foundation. I'm working with NEVA. And just for an example, if you're looking at like a successful 400 capacity venue, on average, it's as an industry, it's bringing in about $1.6 million of revenue. But then if you look at how much is it that is being spent at the restaurant beside it, or the Uber driver, or childcare, if you're a couple going out to a show, that's about $1.2 million. So for that one venue in a city or a rural area, you're looking at almost $3 million of economic impact. And that's just direct. That doesn't even count how does that trickle out within the city. So it's a huge economic driver beyond just being a driver in terms of an industry. It's fostering tourism, it's helping brand the city. And, there are some venues where I've heard them called secular churches. So a festival, a venue, people get together, there's that, what they call creative collisions. So you have people that, are in the arts, but filmmaker, graphic designer, musicians that, when there's live music going on, these networks all of a sudden become extremely close, whether it's a venue, whether it's a festival. But you also have people that are looking at cities differently. I can't tell you, I've played in a band for 20 years now, and I can't tell you how many people I know that are within the music scenes end up working for cities, often because being in a band, you're often in the city all the time. At times when, it's at night where there's a lot of time to think, you have a lot of time when you're on tour, and you see what works and what's not working. You also, at festivals, you get to see the city in a different way. You have streets that are closed down, and it sparks interest because, people that are in music scenes are incredibly smart, talented, skilled individuals that happen to be in music, but that's not all they do. So the absence of live music was really pretty, I hate to say the word deafening, but it was a huge vacuum in more than just the music itself.
That's so well put, Michael. And it gets to sort of some of the broader questions. And again, we're going to be talking, and we'll bring Chris in a minute, and then we'll circle back on some of this stuff. But it seems like one of the major lessons of the shutdown, and of course, we've all been living through this in real time, right? No one ever dreamed that you would have just a comprehensive shutdown of music for 18 months. It's been horrifying on so many levels, but something that's really come to the fore is the importance when we think about talking to policymakers, talking to philanthropy, talking to, sort of understanding where music fits into the life of a community or the life of of everybody, that, historically, especially sort of in a federal policy context, it's easy to think about music being in competition as sort of an entertainment industry, right? So it's in, and this has been a function of the consolidation of these industries, where music has become, major music companies are a part of multinational conglomerates that will have a TV wing, and they'll have a film wing, and they'll be making video games, and they're, doing all these different things to try to capture eyeballs and consumer dollars, but that doesn't really reflect the, sort of essential humanity of what music is, right? Mm-hmm. That music isn't just like, the analogy is not, do I spend my time going to a concert or going to a soccer game, which is the way we think about it often. It's like consumer dollars, like how do you spend your time and your money? It's more like, if you lose music, you lose the social cohesion. And I love your language around kind of the secular church, right? Because it's fundamentally something that gives us this opportunity to have these connection points and be inspired and all this other stuff. And, as part of what's so neat about your work, I think, Michael, and I can't wait to see, the project that you referenced that you're working on, with Neva and others, is the sort of challenge of both reflecting back the importance of the community in terms that people recognize, right? That policymakers recognize, which often is economic impact. Like, they want to see, what does this mean for economy, but also kind of trying to evolve the conversation away from simply like jobs and money, but into sort of a broader understanding. And how do you sort of, again, impossible and almost more of a rhetorical question, but how do you even think about that? How would you approach it? Or how do you approach that in your work? Like, how do we get people to think about it, not just in dollars and cents terms, but in other broader terms about what music means?
Yeah, well, that's actually something I'm starting this summer. I'll be looking at, because that was a question I've always had, and I've worked on venues before even COVID came about. Worked looking at all ages DIY music venues in specifically Flint Local 432 in Flint, Michigan, but also historically the Cog Factory in Omaha, the Metropolis in Seattle, Washington in the 80s and 90s, and looking at what came out of it. More than just ticket sales came out of these venues. And if you look at Flint, they've spun off an entire makers space that's highly successful. And they have entrepreneurship connections with Michigan State, I believe it is. So it's just a matter of going in there. So this summer, I'll be working in Tulsa, Oklahoma and Northwest Arkansas to look at, what is the economic value of the venues? That's, we've been doing that in cultural economics for decades. But what I want to know is, what else is going on? Is there, like Flint, are there entrepreneurial aspects where these musicians and such that are in the scene are actually learning how to identify opportunities, how to locate capital? Is that happening in these areas? Is there also social cohesion? It's definitely, the venues are community builders, and outside of music, oftentimes, what happens when you have a disaster? Venues are very good at having fundraisers. People get married at venues, things like that. It builds that community. But I'm curious okay, does that bridge communities? If you're differing genders, differing ethnicities, differing parts of the city, are venues also facilitating that? And my guess is they are, but until someone gets in there and looks at this and kind of pokes around, we don't really know that yet. And other countries, honestly, are far ahead of us in this kind of research. Australia is blazing a path in terms of looking at how valuable their music scenes are beyond just being an industry. So this summer will be like the Indiana Jones of indie rock, and I'm just going in the field, and when I come back, I'll have things to tell my students, and hopefully also to tell policymakers that your music scenes are way more important than just dollars at this point.
Yeah, no, and that's a great segue to bring in Chris Zacher, because when you talk about the intersection of community and venues and music and art, Levitt is really across the nation is a pretty remarkable model. Thanks so much, Chris, for making time, and I know we've got so much on your plate, but if you don't mind, for those of us, in the audience who don't have a Levitt facility in their community, the concept may be new. Could you just start big picture on what you guys are all about?
Yeah, we work on our mission to increase access to the arts in communities across the United States, and we have 8 permanent Levitt venues, and then we also run an AMP series, which partners with cities that have populations under 50,000 to produce a small music series each summer. I think it's 10 shows in each of those cities, and collectively between our permanent venues and our AMP venues, we're the largest provider of free music in the United States. And, I think sometimes people think about free music and think about really crappy music in a park on a Sunday. And that's not what we're built off of. You can see my venue behind me, sort of. There you go. It's, full lighting, D&B rigs, everything that you would see at a major venue. We just provide a lot of free music to the community. And, I think over the course of the last 10 years, tickets to shows are becoming increasingly more expensive as artists are requiring larger fees for their shows, which is squeezing venues' ability to make money. We kind of work within that and try to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to see live music, high quality live music.
So you guys are coming back a couple weeks. What's happening?
Next Friday, May 14th, we open. Yeah, it's exciting and scary. And I think Dani alluded to it earlier. It's a difficult dance because the rules that we're operating under today are not necessarily going to be the rules on May 15th, and rules on May 15th are going to change again on June 15th. So it's difficult to pull all of that together, and the added cost to do this is pretty high.
Yeah. So you're going, contrast sort of what a typical Levitt experience would be like pre-COVID, and then sort of what the pod system is that you're rolling out next week. And Alex will put the website in the chat if you all want to poke around to see what the experience is as an audience member, just in terms of like buying tickets, making choices.
Yeah, it's, pod setup where our venue seats, somewhere between 16 and 20,000, and we're limited to 3,376 patrons in pods of 4. And it's, it's going to be a different experience, but it's better than what any of us were able to do last year. And Michael said that, music venues are churches. I look at venues as community gathering spaces, not as venues. And when we think about them that way, it kind of changes, how we view this industry, that, we are the community gathering spaces that existed in the 50s and 60s, the Lions clubs, the Catholic churches, everything that used to be really heavy in a lot of these Rust Belt cities, it all disappeared in the 90s and early 2000s. And we picked up that slack, and we're vitally important in multiple ways to the communities that we serve.
Let's talk a little bit about Rock de Mayo. That looks like that is quite a bill.
Yeah, I mean, we love working with Miguel. I believe this will be the 4th time that Miguel's been on our stage, maybe the 5th time. I think he's 5th time. I think he's been on there every single year that we've been open. And we have a large Latin population in the city and county of Denver, and for many years it was ignored. We have a highway that kind of separates the east side and west side of town, Highway 25, and our Latin population tends to live on the west side of town, and the white population's on the east side of town. And I've been working since 2006 to try to figure out how we can bridge these gaps. Pre-Levitt, I ran another concert, nonprofit and concert series called City Park Jazz in Denver, and it worked for almost 10 years to bridge that gap and wasn't able to do it. And now that we have a venue that's on the west side of town that services our Latin population, I think we're starting to make some inroads. And, you've got cultural differences, you have language barriers. There's all kinds of issues of why this has happened in our community. But the city of Denver has really stepped up and started building community centers on the west side of town, started building venues on the west side of town. And it's been a fun run, and it's allowed us to work with fantastic musicians like Miguel and Roca and all these great Latin bands that we have in town that most people on the east side of town, at least, are not necessarily familiar with. And I think it's helped Miguel as well in expanding his footprint in this city and saying, hey, music is universal And it doesn't just have to be 5 white guys on a stage. There's fantastic female musicians and fantastic Asian musicians and Latin musicians. And we really need to work, I think, as a broader community on bringing light to these other genres that are out there, and, showing how great they are.
And I also, just to, not to, no, I don't know why I was going to apologize for this question. Chris, I also want to hold out your work with NEVA, right? So you've been the statewide chapter head, for NEVA. Again, I guess what I was going to say is that's a rabbit hole. We could spend an hour just talking about and all that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get too off track because I do want to focus on Colorado, but I do want to hold up, just speak, if you don't mind, for a minute, sort of your involvement, statewide as kind of a coordinating role, and just sort of the overall national sort of organization and how that's structured. Because I think it's really instructive for all of us how, that came together so quickly and so effectively.
Yeah, it did. There were a lot of us on the independent side that had already been discussing about pre-COVID about creating a collective and a lobbying arm so that we could keep indie venues alive. And COVID just kind of jump-started that. We were having these discussions starting, around October of 2019. So it lined up, just complete coincidence. So, NEVA is a national network of independent promoters and independent venues across the United States. We have 3,000 members. We successfully lobbied for the Save Our Stages Act. My role, I am the chair for the state of Colorado for NEVA, and then I'm also a co-chair for their Emergency Relief Fund, and I work on their federal lobbying fund and their reopening group and their SVOG group, and I kind of bounce around a bunch of committees there. And then I started, along with David Weingarten and Andy Thomas, SIVA, which is the Colorado Independent Venue Association, and we have over 100 members in the state of Colorado there. And it's, this pandemic is frustrating it's been that we can't reopen, and losing all this money over the past year. I know Dani and I have lost more money than we'd like to count. And but to be able to bring everyone together to collectively lobby for our health and viability long term, and show that, hey, we're here and we're important to this economic the arts-based economic driver for the state of Colorado as well. I think often most people think about the shows at Red Rocks, the shows at Pepsi Center, and these big AEG and Live Nation produced shows, and they're important and they play a place in this industry. But artists get their start at independent venues. Communities are driven off of independent venues, and the consolidation that was happening COVID was pretty devastating. We were losing 2-3 independent venues a week nationwide. And, getting to a point where you have a Walmart and a Target controlling the entire music industry is not good for any of us.
Yep. And that's, again, we talk about that a lot on the show, and I don't want to get down the rabbit hole because we got a time in a hurry, but the future, so it's no surprise that it takes a crisis to sort of scale, right, the organizing at this level. And I saw Tim Tutton in the chat today, and it was amazing to see what happened a couple of years ago with the creation of the Chicago Independent Venue League. And we've seen these sort of organizing efforts. Clearly, this has come to a new scale. And the sort of challenge and opportunity is going to be, where does this go past, kind of shuttered venues, right? I mean, where does this go on a state and a local level as we see the sort of power of all of these local groups coming together? What does that translate into? And most of, I think most folks seeing the show know the war stories, from 10 years ago, 12 years ago, with the work that we did, Future Music Coalition, advising the Obama administration about the Live Nation Ticketmaster merger. And, and we didn't have a NEVA, right? We didn't have the scale of these people, these practitioners in the field who really can speak, with authority about, the marketplace challenges and the imbalances. And it's going to be amazing to take that energy into an administration with the Biden administration that's going to be taking a real hard look at antitrust and market power and what that means. It could be really transformative for the community. So we're going to open it up for all y'all and kind of have a roundtable for the last 15 minutes of today's session. Again, we've got so many great, smart people from across the world in the audience, and certainly encourage you, if you've got, questions, comments, throw them in the Q&A, throw them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. I want to start with again, kind of but maybe a little bit of a provocative question, and maybe not an easy one, but I would love to get all of y'all to weigh in on it if you feel called to. One of the interesting complexities of Colorado from an outside perspective is that the state has invested, there's been so much great sort of organic nonprofit and government sort of intention and educational intention around music and around the intersection of what music means for the broader identity of the state and all the things that music can bring over the last 15 years. So we've seen, Dani and the Spokesbuzz team. We've seen Levitt. We've seen a lot of great educators, like the work at CSU and the scaling up of that program. We've seen the work at UC Denver. We've seen Colorado Creative Industries and the Statewide Music Strategy. We've seen Youth on Record. You see a lot of, Denver Arts and Venues. I mean, I can go on. And it seems like music in some ways is sort of bumping right into alignment with the broader, more difficult questions about the future of Colorado as a state and the identity of Colorado and who gets to make those decisions and what does that look like in the future. And I would just love if anybody wants to kind of reflect on what that intersection looks like from your standpoint, and how does work again like Levitt as a community hub trying to kind of bring people together and try to create this cross current or this cross sections. How do you see that fitting into the broader sort of, kind of political and identity dynamics of the state as it goes through some really complex times? Does that question even make sense?
I'm not sure it makes total sense, but we'll play off of it. I'll jump in here first if that's okay, guys.
Please.
I think that Denver for a long time had an identity crisis. What are you? In Colorado in general, it's a boom and bust state. It's mining, it's oil, it's mining, it's oil, and it's growing and shrinking and growing and shrinking. And at some point in time, people started working to say, how can we build a viable economy long term? Well, it's a beautiful state. There's a lot of stuff to do out here, and there's a lot of major artists that live here full time. But what we didn't have were certain components. We've got one major promoter, another major promoter who's a minor player, and a bunch of independent venues kind of all operating willy-nilly by themselves. So, through the work that Levitt has done and Youth on Record, and that Dani's done with Spokesbuzz, and the work that Michael's done since he's moved to Denver, and artists like Miguel who choose to stay here, we're starting to become Music City. Now, we sell a lot of tickets. I believe, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we're one of the top cities in the United States per capita for ticket sales to arts and culture events. And Michael can weigh in on that.
I don't know that for sure, but
Yeah.
I would say that's a very good possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're there as far as what we can draw an audience, and we can support all of this. But what we don't have are other components to the industry. We've got 7S and Madison House here, but we don't have a lot of agencies here. We don't have a lot of groups working on royalty licenses and stuff here. So it's a long play for this community, and having the support from the city and the state and the other municipalities, and having these great music programs at both at CU Denver and at CSU. Things are starting to click along for us, and we're starting to understand, our direction as a state. As Americans, we don't produce much of anything anymore other than art. So knowing that the state and the federal government are starting to get behind that thought process, it's only going to help all of us long term.
Yeah, I would add, Chris, that we really need to try and help lobby for some more incentive support from the state, and so that we can draw some of that stuff in here. And I would say it's film and music, and how are we providing opportunities and making it more interesting for companies to be based here. I mean, we certainly have the beautiful space and, and the place you want to live, but, how can our government and our, start considering some of the things Michael's talking about how much economics is driven by this, and start to get behind the push of how do we accommodate more of the industry being located here, and how do we keep artists like Miguel their career being viable from this being their home base, So I think there's a lot of things we can do. And I'm hopeful that some of the organization that's happening with SIVA, after we get through a lot of the current work that needs to be finished in terms of just like bolstering everybody's, position and longevity, that we can turn and look at some of those things and how do we help guide the government to utilize some of the money that they have in the coffers from all the great shows we do to put it towards continuing to benefit the industry.
Yeah, Dani, we didn't have that before. You think about we're dealing with an issue right here in Colorado right now where we're trying to put limitations on secondary markets because they're dangerous to all of us. They overinflate ticket prices. They bypass what the artist is worth in a community, and it's scalping. And we're trying to work on this. And AG and Live Nation have been at that table, but prior to SIVA being formed, these small independent clubs haven't been part of that conversation. So that's the first thing that's starting to change. And these trade groups like this, when you can pull all of these organizations in, power and mass is a real thing. And I think we're going to be able to make some waves moving forward as we build more capital.
Just to kind of build on what both of you are saying, and maybe to take the question one step further, and Miguel, you may have a take on this. I mean, part of the sort of struggle we see in communities, certainly we've seen, in Seattle, in Austin, we're seeing it in Nashville, we saw it in Los Angeles, is the balance of, getting the reputation of being a creative hub and a great place for art and artists and the lifestyle, which certainly, has boomed in Colorado over the last 10, 15 years. And Dani put, weed boom in there, and that's another conversation about legal weed and what that meant for the influx of people. But you've got this dynamic in Colorado, similar to some of those other cities, where a lot of people coming in, a lot of transplants, a lot of people, putting down roots, and that maybe not being sustainable for artists in terms of housing. And I hear anecdotally, I don't know if it pairs out the numbers, but it's harder to stay in Denver. People are feeling pushed out. Feels like Fort Collins has got some tension, and so that balance of building and strengthening the ecosystem, because you want to have more opportunity, you want to have more shows, you want to have more venues, you want the whole thing to thrive, but then you want to be able to look at the back end about what is your identity of your state to begin with, and who gets to stay and who gets to make those decisions, And I mean, Miguel, are you seeing that with your colleagues and friends, some tension around livability issues and prices, or have things felt pretty under control with you and your people?
Well, for me, it's been a very personal experience because the band's been around for such a long time. We've managed to work through that stuff, but I do see like up and coming artists that are still struggling to get paid for shows, or that are getting paid close to nothing to play shows. So in a kind of a strange way, I feel really excited about the opportunities that we're going to have now, kind of this reset, and have the ability to kind of that people, I know Dani alluded to the fact that it's a great time to talk about economics right now, that the industry hasn't been pulling anything in. But now even bands need to realize that, everybody's needs to get a little piece of the pie, feel respected for the work that they're putting in, not only by the venues, but also the community. So for me, as far as the community goes, like I know that, it's also exciting to understand that people out there are going to be spending money to re-energize the industry. But we really have to be the ones as artists to hold them accountable. Like, you can't just say you support diversity and you support these communities without putting your money where your mouth is, really. As far as in my career here in Denver, it's been hit or miss. People that support you, they feel like having you on as a Hispanic or Mexican band, it gives credibility or authenticity to their event. And then they don't want to pay you, or they don't want to respect you in the way that, your worth is. But it's very personal, because it's also up to the artist to say, no, I'm going to put a stop to that. An example for us is Rock de Mayo. It started as a Cinco de Mayo festival, it was like 10 years ago. And it was very much that. It was a Cinco de Mayo festival. It was like geared towards people that wanted to wear sombreros, show up to the show and do all these crazy shenanigans. We quickly realized like we didn't want any part of that. So we moved it away from being a Cinco de Mayo celebration into being really a cultural kind of event. Michael talked about bridging communities, and that's exactly what the event is for, is to bring bands and genres together. And this is such an important time to do that. Just even in our small, like Hispanic music scene, where the genres are fragmented, the bands are separated, kind of doing their own thing, bringing them together and being able to present a show that kind of is forward facing and that everybody can identify with moving forward, setting like a standard of post-pandemics. But it really does have to do with how much the bands are going to invest in putting back into the communities, and also holding the venues and the promoters accountable for supporting us.
That's so well put. And I'd throw it open for, Chris, Dani, and Michael. I know you all, come at this work with a strong, justice lens, right? I mean, you all do. And I don't think you're sanctimonious about it, but I think you're very concerned about equity in your community and the role that music plays in that. And something we've seen again across the country during the shutdown is this, sort of sense of reflection on how we don't just get back to what we had before, but how do we redefine and rethink our cultural ecosystems? And can you speak a little bit, or do you have anything come to, kind of top of mind about what that may look like in practice as we kind of move into the next stage?
Well, it takes everybody to get to that point. And, one of the bigger issues that we face in our community, especially here in Denver, and I don't want to discount the rest of Colorado, Denver is really the economic driver for the state, where most of the art is taking place on the music side of things. No offense to anybody on the Western Slope, but this is really where the heartbeat is of it. And when you've got national promoters who are predatory in nature and not really interested in helping local artists in their careers, and they're controlling 80% of the marketplace, it's hard to really make a change. So, I can make those changes, Dani can make those changes, and some other independent promoters can make those changes. But it really has to be this top-down approach where everybody's on board, and we're just not there. And, I don't know the reason why. I think that, if you look at somebody like myself, I don't really care about making money. I just want to make sure that the lights stay on. I'm a nonprofit. I'm a nonprofit human being, not just an executive director. I'm a minimalist. I don't need anything. I don't need to take from Miguel's kids' mouths an extra $5 to try to rip them off on a payout. And that's where we need to get. There's a human element in this industry that's missing from a lot of people. And I can talk about it today and people can say, yeah, you're great, or you do this or that, but that doesn't matter if everybody else isn't there along for that ride, participating in that, making sure that we've got fair pay for artists, understanding the needs and desires that they have within our community. It's a long road. I started an organization called the Colorado Music Collective in 2014, and that organization was meant to bridge these gaps and to get artists and venue owners together so we can understand how this game is played, how the math works out. And the independents are there, the local artists are there, the national side isn't there. And that's where the real change has to happen. And until they have new leadership at the helm, it's not going to.
Yeah, and I would add, Chris, that I think, if we could really, thread together a bunch of like-minded independent venue owners like you and me and some other people, and come out with a pledge and put it out on the table. And you and I have talked about this, and you're already there with the work that you do with Levitt in many ways, but really trying to come out and make that statement and then request assistance to do that, help us bring this to the table in a situation where we can't compete with the big gorilla, so how can we all come together and make a plan where we can say, hey, we're going to bring this many more women and BIPOC artists to our stages, and we're going to pay the premium that we need to pay for that and not risk losing enough money to pay our rent this month. Help us come to the table with us and work together. That's something that I'm super excited about, the opportunity post-COVID, rebuilding back better, that we can maybe get louder about this and potentially leverage this into helping support it to make it work. Because you're right, you can even have this wonderful, ideal, but if you can't afford to do it, then it's not going to happen, right? So how do we make it happen? How do we figure out how to support it? So
Yeah, I think it starts with properly funding our woefully underfunded state arts agency, and that's one of the biggest issues, because the state arts agencies are the ones that have the grants for the artists. They have the grants for these venues that do this, but when they're so woefully underfunded that they don't have the funding to help, it's not going to get there. And a lot of people, their help is their mind, and I get that, and that's important. But at the end of the day, it's cash that really speaks and helps push these things forward.
I think that's a great point to end on, and these things definitely all fit together. And the work that again that Mike Seaman is doing at Colorado State is helping policymakers understand the realities of these ecosystems. The work that NEVA is doing and others in terms of organizing and come to the table and demanding more. And again, the fact that the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant has more money than if you combine the 50-year budget of the NEH and NEA together. It's it completely recalibrates the concept of what the federal government can do and should do in terms of investing in the system. Obviously groups like Dani and the work that she's done for a long time through Spokesbuzz and other sort of organizing efforts to kind of lift up our music communities. Hopefully the stuff that we're doing here at MPF is helping, and of course it's all in service to Miguel and bands like iZCALLi and others, because it really always the musician and the artist has to be centered in this conversation. It's not about building more nonprofit infrastructure or building stuff to build it. It's what can and should we do, again, to lift up music and art and culture, because again, it's not an entertainment choice. It's central to who we are. And we've learned, we've always known that, but it's been, we've been reminded of it in a really, really stark way over the period of the shutdown. You guys, thank you for taking time. We can't wait to see what happens in a couple of weeks. We can't wait to be out to see a show at Levitt and up at the Mish. Those of you, again, joined us live, thank you so much for spending part of your Friday with us. We love and cherish your comments, your suggestions, your questions, your very nicely worded constructive criticism. You can hit us anytime at musicpolicyforum@gmail.com. Thanks again to Alex for his great job producing this. There are a lot of resources in the chat, so go read those reports that Michael's done. Go check out the schedules at the Mish and Levitt. Check out Miguel's band. We will see you all next Friday for another edition of Music Policy Forum Live. Have a safe and pleasant weekend. Thanks, guys.